Doug, that was one of the best conversations I've ever had on TV. Truly.
In terms of what you were just saying about the jobs for the middle class going down the road, isn't it a sense that perhaps that's already occurring? Because you hear the unemployment rate's 5.1%, but the underemployment rate is higher than it's ever been, and that's not moving at all other than the wrong direction. So could this be a precursor that perhaps we are entering that time?
Yeah, and in fact, if the labor force participation rate were still as high as it were in 2008 before the Great Recession, the unemployment rate would be about 10%, not 5%. Or that's a number I just read myself a couple of days ago. I didn't calculate it myself. Yeah, we're already at the beginnings of this phase. And if you want, I think, a new justification for a guaranteed basic income that I didn't have in 2005, but I think is important now, it is that we're probably going to have in our future a lot more people who play very productive roles, but it will be in their communities and in what we call the civic culture. And the guaranteed basic income will make it a lot easier for people who don't have traditional jobs to play those roles. There's just going to be a real problem of finding enough work for people at all levels of ability.
I'd like to go back to that 44-inch railing. I'd hate to be the inspector who had to go and say, okay, 42 is okay, because the next guy's going to say, well, mine's 41. You let him go by at 42. Why can't I have my 41? How do you draw a line?
Yeah, and if you're talking about the rule of law and what you want is the rule of law, you don't want a lot of subjectivity in this kind of thing. So if you're asking what my preferred solution would be, not just with regard to regulation, but the legal system as a whole, because the legal system as a whole is in a lot of trouble, would be to have a whole lot fewer laws and regulations, but clearly written, focusing on things that are clearly problems, you know, the coal mine tunnel example, and that are enforced rigorously. But my argument in the book, and as Doug alluded to, I start out with 5 chapters basically saying this is why I'm driven to civil disobedience's solution. We don't have that option of few and simple objective laws. I would like to see one change in jurisprudence which could get somewhat, to some degree, around or at least address the problem you raised. Right now, you can overturn an agency action if it is arbitrary and capricious. That's the legal language used. And the courts have interpreted arbitrary and capricious as the way that the regulation was written. And they have also said, as long as you follow the bureaucratic P's and Q's for creating the regulation, we will assume it's not arbitrary and capricious. What I would like to see is jurisprudence which says, actually, the enforcement of a regulation can be arbitrary and capricious. If they gave that legal remedy, that in itself would go a long way, I think, toward the kind of pushback I want on the regulators to say it's arbitrary and capricious for me to go after this person for the level of problem raised by their violation. I grant your point. If 42 inches is okay, why isn't 40, why isn't 39, why isn't 38? But we're going to have to deal with subjectivity because it's built into the system right now.
You might be able to answer my question in less than 20 minutes. A lot of the discussion on intelligence seems to focus on analytical intelligence, and yet Howard Gardner points out that there are many different areas of intelligence, like interpersonal intelligence, interpersonal intelligence, kinesthetic intelligence, and so forth. Do you see intelligence in a hierarchy, or do you see intelligence more on parallel lines?
Howard Gardner's work is really useful as a way of thinking about the different kinds of ways in which people can do things really, really well. And I also use Howard Gardner's typology of different intelligences in a book called Real Education. And I had him read over the draft to make sure that I got it right in the way I described it. The technical issue is this. There's a technical issue and there's a substantive issue. The first thing is that any kind of test of anything, whether it's intrapersonal skills or visual spatial skills or athletic skills or anything else, has to be able to predict an outcome in order to be a useful test. If it does not have predictive validity, why are you giving the test? IQ tests, or tests basically of visual spatial abilities and verbal abilities, because that's the two main clusters, they have a very good record. They're some of the most powerful measures we have in terms of their predictive validity. If you know the scores, it can give you information about performance in other areas. Things that try to test intrapersonal intelligence, interpersonal intelligence, what's called emotional IQ, there's been a great deal of effort put into trying to create tests that have predictive validity with them, and what happens all the time is that the predictive validity they have comes from their correlation with IQ measures, as opposed to an actual measure of the thing they purport to measure. So this technical point is that I'm perfectly happy to think that charm is a really important characteristic in a human being, that athletic ability is, that intrapersonal things like self-discipline, and that these are really important. I'm saying they're really important. We don't know how to measure them very well in ways that we can capture. The substantive point is this. There are basically two kinds of those of Howard Gardner's 8 or 9 multiple intelligences that can make a whole lot of people a lot of money. And those are what, I don't know, what's his phrase for mathematical intelligence, one of them, and also verbal intelligence. Those two can get you really, really rich. Kinesthetic intelligence can make a very small elite group of athletes really rich. You're talking about tiny number, whereas with cognitive ability, you're talking about that being a really valuable resource for tens of millions of people, and they're making out like bandits in an economy like ours because the skills they have are so valuable now. And that's the hierarchy. It's the test of the marketplace that gives that hierarchy.
With regard to the 42, 44-inch business, there are certain things called engineering drawings. Were those on the drawings for that? And if there was 44 and the contractor built them on 42, then he's liable. There is no problem there. Then with regard to civil disobedience, shouldn't we do that more legally? In other words, if we don't like it, we contact our congressman to change that particular law. And if he doesn't, we work to get him out and put another person who would. And the last item is with regard to special interests. Shouldn't this be such that no congressman or senator will accept, or their staff will accept a penny of contribution from those special interest groups?
Well, the last part I can deal with real quickly. They will have no money whatsoever, except the ones they can get from pure personal contributions. I will simply state the argument I make in more detail in the book, that the reforms of campaign financing in the 1970s had the best of intentions, and boy, did they backfire big time. That's the short answer to that. Look, you've raised a really interesting thing about the issue of the 44-inch railings, and put it correctly on the engineering drawings. If the regulations were such that everybody knew all the regulations, yeah, if you were building a factory, you'd say, oh, well, we've definitely got to put 44 inches on it. One of the most common things you will hear from people who are regulated is, you know, we've been doing everything they asked us to do for 20 years now. And then a new inspector comes out, they've got half a dozen things that are their go-to list of regulations they enforce that we've never heard of before. Not only is it hard to know just by going to the law what all the regulations are, with these complicated regulations, even though you read them, that doesn't tell you if you behave in such and such a way you're safe, and in another way you aren't safe. And even if you go to the regulatory agency and say, please give us guidance, how can we be safe? And you don't get it. The degree to which You have a regulatory state out here, and here's where I think some of my more dramatic rhetoric is justified. The degree to which they are functioning in a world of their own, impervious to outside influences, is really scary. And you know what? You call up your congressman can't get you relief. First place, you better have a big contribution which you make, or you're going to get none of your congressman's time. It'll cost you money. And secondly, he has no power over the regulatory agencies. You know what? The President of the United States, let's say he's a buddy of yours, and you can get him. He can call up, and probably he can get the people in the regulatory agency to answer the phone, being President of the United States, but legally, he's quite limited in what he can do, too.
What do you think of means testing for Social Security, for example?
Well, I'm 72. I'm now collecting Social Security. And I could easily live without much change in lifestyle without it. And given the kind of problems that we're having with the bankruptcy of the system, I think probably what you have to do is to means test it. And we're rescuing the government from what essentially is a Ponzi scheme. They misrepresented what we were doing with Social Security. They treated it as if, oh, you're contributing to this fund, as if this fund is put aside. If, in fact, our contributions to Social Security all these years had been taken and put in an index fund, I would be rich as Croesus at this point, but they weren't. They're not handled that way. So do I think means testing is probably something we have to do? Yes. Do I feel the government has behaved disgracefully for the last 70 years with regard to Social Security? Yes, I also believe that.
You talked earlier about how wonderful it would be if we had a little organization that would come into these ridiculous situations and take our case. Mm-hmm. Wouldn't that be a great thing for the government to set up?
I want something that will work. The government would screw this up so badly. I mean, even if you had the best of intentions, they would. No. What you want are a lot of lawyers who are really angry at what is being done to interfere unjustifiably in the lives of ordinary Americans. That's what you want. People are really driven by passion.
I think we have to stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.